Hello, everyone. My name is Lucía Fuentes, and I'm a professor in the Department of Natural Sciences. And today, together with colleagues from the Health and Wellness Center, Student Health Services, Student Affairs, and Student Life, we would like to present a summary giving you information regarding the biology of the coronavirus. And basically, I'm going to do that section, and then some of my colleagues have given you information in the last few slides on what you can do, who you can contact, and the services that are provided at LaGuardia. Thank you. So first of all, what are viruses? What is this coronavirus? So coronaviruses are just one group of viruses. All viruses are very, very tiny. They're sub-microscopic. They usually consist, they're very, very simple in terms of their components. They consist of genetic material that encodes for all the information to make new particles. And that genetic material is enclosed in an envelope or a capsid. And on that envelope, the viruses have spikes that vary depending on the type of virus, as you can see in the picture. Uh, Coronaviruses have the genetic material that is surrounded by protein in order to protect it. That's that sort of worm-like structure that you see inside. And then when the virus comes out of the cells, it takes with it the cell membrane. And so, but it already has adorned the cell membrane with its own proteins, which are the spikes that are very, very particular of each coronavirus. And this is what makes the coronavirus infective. Now, viruses are nothing new. Viruses have been around for a very, very long time. In fact, if you can see in this Egyptian drawing, the Ruma, the temple priest in Egypt, you can see his left, well, actually it's his right leg that is very, very thin, and that is very, very typical of a survival or survivor of polio. Now, polio is actually, the causal agent of polio is also a virus. It's called a picornavirus. And you can see the picornavirus on the right-hand side of the slide. These are very tiny viruses, and they're different from coronaviruses. So viruses don't only infect humans, they infect a lot of animals, and they also infect plants. In fact, one of the first viruses to be discovered as a virus was tobacco mosaic virus, and you can see the tobacco leaves on the left-hand side here. And tobacco mosaic virus is a rod-like virus, and again, it has the two components. It has genetic material, and then it is surrounded by capsid, by proteins, which protect that genetic material. So now let's go back to the virus which we're interested in today because of the pandemic that we are hearing about that's occurring presently around the world. So coronaviruses are viruses that have been known for quite a while. They're present in a lot of mammals, and usually coronaviruses actually cause symptoms that have to do with the respiratory tract, the respiratory system. And there have been severe diseases that in the past, such as the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome or MERS, and the severe acute respiratory syndrome of SARS. But in general, a lot of colds are actually caused by coronaviruses, so they can have mild symptoms. Now, in the case of the present coronavirus, the symptoms that present in people who are infected are fever, cough, shortness of breath, and breathing difficulties. So 1 in 5 people that are infected with the virus will actually show more severe symptoms and including pneumonia, kidney failure, and in unfortunate cases, it can cause death. So one of the reasons that this virus is so virulent, so the word virus comes from being virulent and causing a lot of disease. And one of the reasons this particular virus causes a lot of disease is because it's a relatively new virus to the human population. So we haven't built defenses. Our immune system, our system that protects ourselves, has never seen this virus. So there's no memory that can come and rescue us and destroy the virus. The virus is thought to have been actually or have originated in bats. Bats have many, many coronaviruses, and it is thought that, so this virus is said to have a zoonotic origin, meaning it came from animals. And in some instances, these animals maybe are eaten by other animals, and then somehow if humans slaughter those other animals, then they can actually infect humans. In the beginning, usually they're not very successful in infecting humans, and the transmission from human to human is not effective because the viruses are not adapted to humans. But because viruses replicate in cells very quickly, then they can actually become very infectious. And at that point, then they go from human to human. And this is what we're seeing today. This process where the virus goes from one animal or one mammal to another mammal. So, for example, from camels to humans, that is called a spillover. And a lot of spillovers, as I will talk about a little bit later, are caused because of overcrowding, poverty, climate change. All these things are actually pushing us to the limits in terms of our contacts with animals, which normally wouldn't occur. Okay, so I just want to tell you a little bit about the biology of the virus. So this is the virus. This is a diagram of the virus, and as you can see, it has the spikes outside, and then it's surrounded by a membrane. So embedded in that membrane are those spikes. And then inside, as I mentioned before, is the genetic material. So genetic material is, again, what has all the information, and viruses can have a deoxyribonucleic acid, which DNA, which is what we have as our genetic material, but they can also have RNA, which is ribonucleic acid, which is an intermediate, but it's also basically codes, has all the information to make everything the virus needs. The virus doesn't have the machinery to make it. So this is why we don't really call viruses cells or living organisms, because they don't actually have everything they need to make more of themselves. They need host cells. They need complete cells that they can take over and use them in order to replicate. So here you can see it's a diagram basically of what happens. So the coronavirus, initially it was thought to only infect the lungs, but we know that now that one of the reasons it is so contagious is because it infects the tissue right in our nose. So these cells that are called the epithelial cells that cover our upper respiratory system, so our nostrils and our throat, and in fact, even throughout our mouth, apparently, this virus attaches to receptors on the cell. So you can see in the upper left-hand side, you can see that the cells have proteins in their membranes, and these proteins that are depicted here like a little Y, they act as receptors. And they're very specific. These spikes in the virus recognize those receptors. And when there's a reaction between the spike and the receptor on the cell engulfs it. It eats it eats the virus, and the virus tricks the cell to a certain degree. And when it's inside the cell, then it disassembles and it releases its genetic material. So this is where you see here genomic RNA. So that is the genetic material. That has all the information, and it starts using all the machinery of the cell to make lots of proteins, to make more copies of the genetic material. And it uses all the entire machinery, including all these membranes that our cells have, and it uses those membranes to create the particles. So it basically, as you can see here, it replicates, then it uses what's called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. That's where it picks up the membrane envelope, and then once it's completed its assembly, then the cell releases the particles. So there's a huge number of particles that are released. These cells die, and when they're releasing all the viruses, they're also releasing a lot of other molecules that are telling our immune system that there's something very, very wrong. So our cells are starting to recognize that there are all these particles that are really not supposed to be there, and then our immune system starts mounting this very extreme reaction that actually in some respects causes the dysfunction of our lungs, because there's a lot of fluid accumulation, there's a lot of cell accumulation that causes inflammation, and that causes havoc, and causes the difficulty breathing, the basically reflex to cough, because we want to get rid of all that fluid, and then later it can cause other serious problems, and basically heart, the kidney, especially if you have other complications as a result of pre-existing conditions. So as I mentioned previously, when a virus takes over the machinery in a cell, it's all the synthesis machinery of the cell. The cell can no longer perform its own functions. Instead, what happens is that you start seeing the production of millions of viral particles, and those particles are released by those cells. And here we can see an example of the release of a virus particle or a viral particle from a cell that has been infected. Now, the release of these virus particles in great amounts allow for these particles to be in the fluids within our nostrils, in our throats, or the sputum. That's if we try to cough out whatever accumulation exists in our lungs, we have a lot of particles there. Because the virus can infect cells in our nostrils and our throat, then all the defenses that we have in our respiratory tract, where when we breathe in, you have hair in your nose, and then you have little cilia, like little batting hairs that actually throw out any foreign particle that wants to come into your lungs. But because it doesn't need to go all the way into your lungs, the virus can first replicate within your upper respiratory system. This is what's different from those other diseases that are also caused by coronavirus, like the SARS and the MERS that I mentioned before, that were very lethal in that they caused a very high death rate, but they weren't as contagious as this particular virus. So the production of these millions of particles in the upper respiratory system, and the fact that these little droplets that when you cough, you basically can travel in the air as little droplets, and they're full of viruses. And if one of those droplets actually happens to fall into one of our nostrils, then there's enough particles that they can start actually attack, or I should say, infecting our cells. And if you have enough of those little droplets, then that could lead to the COVID-19, which is the name of the disease caused by this new coronavirus. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, this virus replicates very effectively and efficiently in your upper respiratory system, which means that when you cough out droplets, when you cough, you usually release droplets of fluids, and in those droplets you have a lot of viruses. And as I mentioned before, because the virus is able to replicate in your upper respiratory tissue, then it's very contagious. This makes it very, very contagious. It doesn't have to go all the way into the lungs in order to be able to create or divide, take over the cells and divide and make a lot of particles. This is why you may have heard that it's very important to keep a distance of at least 1 meter between people, and that's because usually when you cough, the droplets will not travel more than that 1 meter. Now, obviously, that's the other reason that people are discouraged from getting into large groups where you're very close together, enclosed in contained areas, and you try and maintain a physical distance between one another. So another aspect that people are concerned about is, okay, well, I'm keeping my distance between people, but what if a person coughs, and when they cough, they actually leave all these droplets on a surface? And that's a fair question to have. So there's not a clear idea of how long the virus will persist on surfaces, but probably like other coronaviruses, it probably can stay infected for a few hours up to several days. It all depends on the conditions. So there are studies that have, as you can see on this slide, there are studies that have looked at different temperatures and different types of surfaces to see how long coronaviruses persist. Regardless, the virus does persist for long enough that there may not be anybody around that's coughing, and yet the virus may still be on a surface. So what's very important is, number one, to try not to touch a lot of surfaces, but not only that, if you clean the surface, you can use a disinfectant. So either 70% ethanol or hydrogen peroxide, or isopropanol. Those all seem to basically inactivate the virus. And the reason they do so is because the viruses, don't forget, have this membrane, which is a lipid membrane, just like our membranes. So alcohol actually breaks that apart. So I've mentioned how the virus actually divides and takes over your cells. I've also mentioned how when it takes over your cells, you have a lot of viral particles that are released from those cells that the virus has taken over. And that this is how, because of the release of all these particles, other people get infected. Now, what's happening in our bodies? How come some people get very sick and other people don't get that sick? Now, this is a new virus. Because it's a new virus, our body has never seen it before, and so people do not have defenses that are specific to the virus. So what happens is that our bodies do have a general defense system that recognizes any foreign type of body that comes in to contact with our cells, and basically it recognizes all invading pathogens. These cells that actually see the virus start producing a lot of alarm signals, and those alarm signals make it so that our body starts going into an alarm state. That alarm state includes an increase in temperature, in our body temperature. That increase in our body temperature is somewhat adaptive in that high temperature will
increase our metabolism, produce more cells, allow for more reactions to occur, and also, to some extent, destroy the virus, because the virus is actually better off in cooler environments. The other thing that our cells do, our defense system does, is that it releases signals that make other cells produce a lot of antiviral molecules. These antiviral molecules, in some respects, cause a lot of the symptoms. They cause inflammation, they cause fluid coming into the area, and the whole purpose of that, so to speak, is to actually destroy the virus. But many times it also causes symptoms that are detrimental to the person. Paired with that, our cells produce antiviral molecules that are very specific. In the case of these types of viruses, they produce molecules that are called interferons. Interferons because they interfere with the viral replication process. Now, these viruses, these coronaviruses, are known in many cases, the more virulent or more pathogenic viruses are known to actually stop our cells from producing these interferons. So if we are not producing these specific antiviral molecules, then the virus gets the opportunity to replicate even more readily. Later, we have the production of very specific antiviral molecules by our immune system. This usually takes up to 2 weeks. So if you have a mild case of the COVID-19, you will basically, in theory, become immune to another infection. So you will not be getting that same viral infection because your body has already seen the virus, and so now next time you have that virus come into your body, you'll have a very, very quick neutralization of the virus. So you might remember how at the beginning of this talk I spoke about how viruses have been around for quite a long time, a very long time in fact, and one example I talked about was polio. Now polio is a deadly disease, so how come we don't have any more polio now? So one of the reasons that polio has been pretty much eradicated, and as you can see here, basically now we have no deaths from polio, is the fact that we actually vaccinate the population. So the polio vaccine has allowed for a drastic decrease in the number of polio cases, and as a result, in a drastic decrease in the number of people that have died from polio. This is also true for other diseases such as measles, mumps, and viral diseases that you are vaccinated when you are a child. So we presently don't have a vaccine for this new coronavirus. Making a vaccine is not that straightforward. It's not that easy. But it does basically, making a vaccine relies on our own body and how our own body reacts to viruses. So you might remember that when we are infected with virus, our whole body reacts in order to isolate, in order to kill the virus. It usually is not very effective initially, and it takes a while to actually mount a reaction that is specific to the virus and that can actually destroy the virus specifically. A vaccine allows you to accelerate that process. So how does this happen? So what vaccines do is basically, when you get a vaccine, you get a weakened or even killed form of the virus. So in the case of viruses, they have very particular spikes that are specific only to the virus, and so we can make a vaccine where we actually show that spike to our body without the particle that carries that spike also carrying all the genes, all the genetic material that causes the disease. So we weaken the virus and then inject it into a person, and that's the vaccine. And so our body sees it and produces these very specific molecules against that virus without us actually suffering from the disease. So these antibodies, which are these particular molecules, they basically stay in the memory of our immune system. And if you're ever actually exposed to the real thing, to the virulent virus, then now instead of having to wait for 2 weeks, your body has a memory of that virus, and it immediately starts producing these antibodies and neutralizes the virus before it has a chance to spread and cause the horrible symptoms. So finally, I just want to give you a very superficial, I guess, and quick overview of what is happening presently and why we call what is occurring a pandemic. So a pandemic, basically, as I mentioned, is an infectious disease that actually has a significant and ongoing person-to-person spread, and that it is widespread throughout the world, as we know is the case with the coronavirus. Coronavirus is, first of all, brand new. It's able to infect people very, very easily and can spread from person to person very, very quickly and in a sustained manner. So what happens is, because this virus, because none of us actually have a defense, none of us has ever seen this virus, then we're all pretty susceptible to the virus. Because it is so contagious, many of us will actually get that virus. Most of us, like 1 in 5 of us, will not suffer terrible consequences, but a large part of the population, like the elderly and people that have pre-existing conditions, will suffer greatly. And these people, the larger, the less contained the virus is, the more people that are going to be having to use hospitals and all the healthcare infrastructure in a country. And so one of the things that governments try to do before the spread goes wild is that, in order to try and contain it to some extent, they reduce, this is why you have school closures, this is why you have the cancellation of events where you have a lot of people together, and this is all in an effort to try and reduce the spread throughout the community. So what's important is that each one of us as an individual, must consider that even though we may be very healthy and we think, oh, well, nothing's going to happen, I'll just get a cold, the reality is that if we get this coronavirus, even if we just get a cold, we will actually be vectors. We will be transmitting it to other people who may not be as lucky as we are, in that they may actually have much worse symptoms and in fact end up being hospitalized. So what you're doing here is you're really trying to promote a community, a sense of community, to protect the most weak. So I'm not going to go in detail about all these other aspects that actually have a huge impact on the emergence and spread of infectious diseases. The fact is that if we look historically, the number of infectious diseases that we have had in the past century and the century is clearly increasing. And we can attribute this to factors that have caused changes in the way people interact with their environment. So clearly climate change has played a role, since there are large areas that where people are unable to live anymore because of drought, because of all kinds of natural disasters caused by climate change. We also have, due to climate change, we also have the moving of certain types of vectors, such as mosquitoes. So we have the case of Zika, dengue, that is coming up into the northern hemisphere, mainly because now the mosquitoes are able to survive in a warmer, uh, in a warmer upper hemisphere, which before they did not come to. Uh, all these things have impacts on the social impacts in that, first of all, people don't have access to food. So there's food insecurity, there's poverty, which leads to, obviously, poverty has, people don't have proper housing, they don't have proper health care, they don't have access to water, and their bodies themselves are depleted of all the requirements in terms of nutrition. All this is going to basically make people a lot more uh, targets of these infectious diseases. Um, I just want to bring this to light because this is not something that is going away. This is something that we need to actively engage in trying to mitigate the factors that actually are underlying the spread and the emergence of um, all types of infectious diseases. So here I've presented a very limited account of what this virus is, and just in general trying to give you some information that may help you understand what is going on. But I suggest that you look for reliable information on coronaviruses. There's a lot of misinformation going around. These are two links that I think provide with reliable information. The World Health Organization is the bottom link, and then the John Hopkins University has coronavirus and COVID information link, which is right at the top. So these are two sources that are constantly updating the information they receive from scientists all over the world. And so I want to close this presentation by saying that there's one thing that brings hope, that is very encouraging, and that is that the response of scientists throughout the world to this coronavirus has been outstanding, and the sharing of information has been quick and open, and something that has basically really never been seen before. All the information is for everyone there. It's available. In fact, once the Chinese declared this crisis, in 3 days they were able to sequence the genetic material of the virus, and they immediately shared it with the World Health Organization in order to be able to provide it to everyone so that the test kits could be made. So I want to sort of close that on the bright side, and be safe, wash your hands, and take care. Thank you.